If you have to take the Series 65 exam, this is the video that I would have wanted to see had I been looking when I was on YouTube as I was studying. So my goal with this video is to just talk straight up, cut all of the bullshit, and discuss the Series 65 exam for how it is. Now, if you're anything like me, you're not from the finance industry to begin with. I started my career in marketing. I was a marketing major in college, and then I moved into commercial real estate. So coming into the finance world was totally new to me. And the idea of taking all of these exams, whether it was the SIE or whether it was the Series 7 or the 65, it was a very daunting experience. You know, I've never been a good test taker to begin with. And as a matter of fact, at that, before I get any further, what qualifies me to be making this video? Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. I'm just an individual who had to recently take the 65 and wanted to share my experiences because I think those experiences matter. And like I mentioned, there is not a lot of content outside of some of the greats on YouTube, such as Brian Lee from Test Geek Exam Prep and Dean Tinney, as well as Capital Advantage Tutoring. Those three are really strong on YouTube, but there's not enough videos talking about these exams as they are. A great place that I have found this is the Reddit, the subreddit r/Series 65, I think it is. That's where you could find a lot of conversations, but there's not a lot of short form like this. So I just wanted to spend some time talking and giving some encouragement about this exam. For those of you who are just getting started with it, it's going to be a lot. And there's really no way around this. This exam is a beast, and odds are you need it to do your job. I would imagine that whether it's your vendor or it's your own business or something of this sort, there is something legally requiring you to do this, and if you don't do this, you can't do your job. I'm willing to bet most of you have to do this for your company, or you face possibly, having to find a different job within the firm or something like that. That's usually how the sort of situation goes with these exams. And I know that's a lot of pressure because usually, if you're anything like how it was with me, you have to take these exams while you're working a full 40-hour minimum work week. It's very hard to cram this stuff in, but that's exactly what I wanted to talk about in this video. So this one's not going to be as much about things you could do to prep, and there's going to be many videos like that on this channel. This is just more about encouragement. No one is going to shoot it this straight with you online. And yeah, sure, maybe your coworkers will, but let's cut the bullshit and talk about this. The exam is tough, and it's not fun. If you're anything like me, like I've already mentioned, you're not a good test taker, and believe me, that makes it even less fun because when you're not a good test taker, it's obviously harder to focus, it's harder to study and all of that. And all of it is curable, absolutely. But naturally, some people, like I know there's a couple friends of mine who have walked into, let's say it's the real estate test after having barely studied and they pass on the first try. I know people for the 65 that was the case too. For me, that would not be the case no matter how hard I studied. It's just not something I've ever been skilled in. And yes, again, you could improve in it and get better, but I'm sure if you're watching this video, there's a chance you're probably in a similar boat. So if you are, again, I wish I was one of those people that could take a test on a first try and pass. I wish you were that type of person too. But the reality is, even for those people who can walk in and pass this exam in one try, it's still a very tough exam and requires time in the textbooks no matter what. So with that being said, obviously one of the best things you could do is dedicate that time to focusing on the textbook, which means you're probably not going to have much of a life in the time that you are using for the studies. So what I mean by that is pretty straightforward, but if you're working a full 40-hour week, you can't be doing much else. Unfortunately, it's just the reality of it. You need to put the time in. So if you're not at work, you need to be studying for this exam because otherwise you are not going to get through this thing. I hate to break it to you, but if you do, it will be a divine miracle. This exam is written by lawyers and written with a lot of legalese. It is a very difficultly worded exam. And while the material itself is not complicated if you've spent any time at all in the finance industry. And even if you haven't and you're interested in joining and you're taking this because of that, odds are you're going to find this material relatively easy, but that's not the problem. It's the test makers who are actually designing this exam to be more difficult than it really is, I should say. That's one of the biggest problems with it. Not exactly the material itself, just the way the questions are worded, because they are trying to get you to fail. One way or the other, that's the case. We're not going to go into exact technicalities of any of that stuff, but they want you to be caught off guard because in the end of the day, think about it. It's reasonable. They don't want anyone just to walk in off the streets and become an investment advisor representative. There's no way on earth that the regulators would want that to be the case. So why would they make it easy for you? The whole point of this, and not that I personally agree with it because I don't think a standardized tests is indicative of how you are as an employee or whatever, but that being said, it makes sense. From a regulatory standpoint, wouldn't you want someone who you felt knew this information in and out for the greater good of the finance industry? I think that's reasonable. I think that makes sense. And again, whether I agree with it or not doesn't really matter. But it clearly seems to be that NASA, the administrators of this, they want to essentially trim the fat with this exam, meaning they intentionally design questions to trick you. So you have to be prepared for that. And the only way to get prepared for that, like I've already mentioned, is to put the time in and study. There's no way around that. There's a lot of materials out there that could help you do that. Some of the things that have helped me is, and I'm going to list them all probably in a separate video as well, but some of the biggest things that helped me is number one, reading the textbook from cover to cover. And I know that is not fun. My textbook was from Kaplan. It's 600 plus pages long, bigger than the Bible, and no one wants to read something like that at all. I don't even read to begin with, if I'm being honest. I've never been that much of a reader. No one wants to do that. But it is by far the most important thing that you could do to get past this exam. It doesn't matter who else you use, whether it is Brian Lee from Test Geek, whether it's Dean Tinney, whether it's Ken from Capital Advantage, or even let's say it's Knopman Marks' videos, which we're going to get into in a minute. It doesn't matter who it is. If you're watching those video supplements and haven't read the textbook, you're going to fail the exam. You are going to fail it. I know from experience. I love all of those the vendors, all of them, from Brian Lee to Dean, all of them. Love them to death. But even they will tell you that their material is not something that you could use exclusively against the textbook. You need to read the textbook with their material. They explicitly say that. Like, for instance, if you bought Brian Lee's Series 65 course, he goes into that and explicitly says, this is not a replacement for your textbook, but it's an addition to your textbook. Use it as that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because on my first attempt, I took this exam 3 times before I passed it. On my first attempt, the only thing I did was watch videos. And I can assure you that if you do that, you will be blindsided and hit by a ton of bricks by this exam, because a lot of what is on the exam is not covered exclusively in those videos. Sure, those videos extremely help you with the context of a lot of what gets deeper into the weeds in the textbook and all of that, but there is stuff that the textbook covers that those videos just never will because they don't have the time, resources, and just don't find it fully important to talk about one-off little things. So it is not at all something that you could avoid. I learned that mistake the hard way, so you don't have to. And I hope you hear with emphasis how important that is. Read the book. I don't care what you do. I don't care what other supplements you use. That is by far and large the most important thing you could do, is just sit down and read it. And one way to, eat an elephant is to take one bite at a time. I know that's cheesy, but seriously, that logic applies perfectly to the textbook. Read it in small doses. Each day, read a little bit of one chapter. Eventually, you'll get through it. If you're on a 30-day window, I guarantee you'll get through it. Just dedicate the time. Time block if you have to. Do whatever you have to do. I'm not here to tell you how to best study. I'm here to tell you what resources are the best and give you that encouragement. So, biggest thing by far is that textbook. Not even close. And then the second thing with it, because I think both of these are just as equal, and then there's some other resources out there, but the second thing that is just as important is to take specifically the Kaplan Qbank and answer as many questions as possible with that Kaplan Qbank. I think as of right now, there are 4,200 something questions within the Qbank. And that gives you a lot of leeway to practice because it breaks it down by chapters based in the Kaplan textbook, which, by the way, is the exclusive textbook that I personally recommend. I've heard there's others that are really good, but I know for a fact Kaplan's is. Because once you read Kaplan's, and really quickly, because I forgot to mention this, once you read Kaplan's textbook once, and you go to sit for the exam, you'll realize that there's maybe only one or two questions that do not look familiar to you. The textbook covers it all. I promise you that. They're never going to deviate. And even if they do, these exam providers, whether it's Kaplan or whomever, they adjust their textbooks pretty much yearly. And I know some people find it a little ridiculous that they do that and all of that stuff, but they adjust it yearly based off of what they've heard and based off of how the exam itself has changed. So you really should read this thing cover to cover. But anyway, that's beside what I was saying with the Kaplan Qbank. The Kaplan Qbank is great because if you get a question wrong, it shows you where in the textbook you could go or read about that. So you could take simulated exams with explanations on or off to simulate as close as you could possibly get to the real exam. You could do however you want, essentially. And it grades them, so you get to see a performance track of where you're at. And my favorite thing about Kaplan's Qbank is that it does have this section called a supplemental exam, or a simulated exam is the word, not supplemental. But it has simulated exams. And those simulated exams, one, are harder than the actual exam because a lot of the questions in Kaplan's Qbank are a lot more detailed than you are going to find on the actual Series 65 exam. And that's good. You want your simulated exams to be harder because you want to be as challenged as possible to learn as much as possible. So without a doubt, if I were you, and the first thing that I would do when I started studying was buy the Kaplan Qbank and buy the Kaplan textbook. And make sure that Kaplan Qbank comes with the simulated exams. It's a third tab in the center of the screen that's red and says Simulate Exam. That's what you want. You really should have it. There's some great discount codes if you want to find them. Dean Tinney always advertises his discount codes, which I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but go check out his channel. I'll put the link in the description for that. But do not slack on these. If at all there's nothing else you do, these are the two you should do, the textbook and the Qbank. But I don't think that's it. So we're going to get into the rest. But if you're in dire straits and you need something, it's no questions asked. Those are the two things you should get. But outside of that, that's where the supplemental things come in. And those are Dean Tinney, Series 7 Guru, that's on YouTube. That's Brian Lee from Test Geek Exam Prep. And then that's Ken, I believe his name is, from Capital Advantage. They're all on YouTube, and they all do a really phenomenal job of cutting the noise for these exams, telling you what exactly you need to know. And not only that, Dean Tinney has some outstanding videos where he explicates Kaplan's Qbank. So he'll sit down with either a student of his that he's tutoring or just himself and take a full 140 question Series 65 exam. And for each question, he will explicate. So the whole goal is you hit pause, answer the question. If you get it right, great. He explains why it's right. If you get it wrong, he explains why it's wrong. It is a fantastic tool. And not only that, there's so many others, such as the one where he does the Series 65 exam in 60 minutes that you're supposed to watch the day of or the day before your exam. That's a godsend. And he also just explicates all sorts of things from the test, things such as beta, alpha, standard deviation, all of the things that you're going to encounter, all the hits, all the good ones, all of that stuff. It's all there. He's fantastic. Brian Lee is a phenomenal resource for cutting the noise, like I mentioned, and making things that are complicated really simple. Things such as modern portfolio theory, CAPM, things like that, the balance sheets, all of that. It's very difficult in the textbook to fully grasp if you're not in this industry. So what he does is he makes those concepts really digestible and easy to understand for those of you who are not in the industry. And it doesn't matter whether you are or aren't, he's just a great resource for explaining the textbook in a different way. But as I mentioned, none of them are supplements, complete supplements for your textbook. That is something you do along with your textbook, not exclusively. So just make note of that. I'm going to put the links in the descriptions for all of them. Brian Lee's video courses are paid, but there are some free ones on YouTube. I'm going to link both in the description just so you have that as resources. But those are the biggest ones. Now, another thing, if your firm or whomever did not provide you with an actual test exam prep provider or whatever you call them, vendors, I don't know what you call it, whatever, doesn't matter. There's a lot out there, whether it is Kaplan, like I've mentioned about the textbook and the Qbank. So there's Kaplan, there's Knopman Marks, there's Passmasters, I think is one of them, Exam FX, STC. There's a ton of them out there. It's really important if you want to get one, it's really important that you make the right decision in these. And I think the clear winner of this, and maybe it's biased because I've used it, but I've also used a few others before, so we'll get into that in a minute. But I think the clear winner is Knopman Marks, because Knopman Marks not only uses the Kaplan textbook already, so you have that to go with, but it also uses the Kaplan Qbank all in one price. And it has its own video courses and incredible supplements from key concepts that you should review, which are the most important things per chapter, and flowcharts. It has all of that. And the video courses are amazing because it comes with this big workbook when you sign up for the course. It comes with this big workbook where it makes you fill out things from the video as the instructor, Dave, goes. So as you're watching, you're also staying engaged by writing. And the whole goal is once you're done, you then review the notes and it's supposed to help you. And guess what? It does. It's fantastic. It is by far, I think, the best exam providers out there, the best prep providers or whatever you want to call it. From what I understand, Kaplan is not far off. Now, I've never purchased Kaplan's course specifically, but I have gone with STC in the past for my Series 7, and I didn't like it. It does come with its own Qbank, so it is an option, just like Kaplan's, Knopman's, and all of that. However, I want to be clear that STC's questions are not as tricky as what you're going to see on the actual exam, and if you use that, you're going to be blindsided. That's the matter of it. You are going to be blindsided. So if I were you and you had to pick one, I would pick Knopman Marks because it curates the best of the best, and they have 24/7 tutoring support available. There's people in their company that you could call if you have questions or even text if you have questions, and they will help you get the job done. I can't swear enough about Knopman Marks. I think they are by far the best because it layers in all of the most important things. At the time of writing this, the Series 65 course from Knopman is $395. So it includes a lot, and I'm going to look at this right here because I have it up on screen. It includes so much. It includes 19 hours of video lectures, access to the training center, benchmark exams, digital flashcards, the textbook provided from Kaplan, downloadable supplements, which I've sworn by in the past, and even an iOS mobile app so that you could study with the flashcards online. I already mentioned it has the online question bank from Kaplan. This is what you really should get. And it has, like I mentioned, client success team support. I can't stress enough how important this is because I think their material is just top notch. It really is. But I will make one caveat to that in that Knopman Marks's Qbank is the same one I mentioned from Kaplan. However, if you want access to the simulated exams that I stressed a lot about, you need to buy the Qbank, unfortunately, on your own. The Knopman one is just those 4,200 something questions, which is great and what I think you should use 99% of the time. But on that 1% when you're taking those simulated exams, which you should only take a couple in your month of studying or however long, maybe it's not 1%, but whatever. That's where you get your money's worth with actually buying the Kaplan Qbank on its own. So I did both. I had Knopman Marks as my course prep provider, all of that. And on the side, I actually bought the Qbank again, just so I had access to the simulated exams. Now, Knopman Marks also has their own simulated exams. And where I think this comes in handy is the more you hit that Qbank and the more you work through the things within it, the more you're going to get comfortable with the material. But you know, Kaplan has one way of explaining things, then Knopman Marks has another way of asking questions and all of that. The point I'm trying to make, and I worded that a little funky, this video is getting long, but worded it a little funky. Each test provider, each course people, whatever, they have different ways of asking questions. Some are more challenging than others. So it's really good to stay on your toes and get exposure to different tests. So Knopman's is good because they have their own, like I mentioned, their own simulated exams as well as the Kaplan Qbank. But I don't think they're as good as Kaplan's exclusively. So you could use Knopman's, and you should, but mainly you should be spending your time in the Qbank that Knopman provides instead of those supplemental exams. This may get confusing, but if you do go on their website, I think it will be a lot more clear for you. But all of that to be said, Knopman is fantastic. I can't stress enough, they are the best provider for you. And then the last two pieces of advice are number one, flashcards, and number two, getting a one-on-one tutor session if you can. I personally got one with Brian Lee from Test Geek Exam Prep, and it was one of the most beneficial things that I did in my studies. He explained the basic economic concepts chapter, which it's crazy that that was the one that really tripped me up, but newsflash, apparently it is for a lot of people. But he made that section really easy for me and made it make sense. And that's where a tutor can really come in handy. I did 2 tutoring sessions, and both of them I came out feeling much more confident in the material I had questions on. I can't stress it enough. You really should. And now the flashcards are self-explanatory, so I'm not really going to go too deep there. But there's a lot of great tutors out there. I personally went to Brian Lee. Dean Tinney also offers tutoring, but I will mention that he is pretty booked up most of the time, so I would look out for that if you're considering him. So I would book ahead if you could, is what I'm trying to say. But Ken from Capital Advantage, I think his name's Ken, I feel bad if it's not, whatever. Those all have private tutoring, and then there's others. You know, Varsity Tutors is another, and there's a million out there. Even Knopman Marks has their own. I do believe if you want to get a full tutoring session, I think that's like 2 hours or something, but it's paid, I think. I would have to check. So if I were you, I would check the website exclusively. But overall, the point of this is, at face value, this exam is objectively not fun. And I hope with those materials I provided that they make your studies a lot easier. I would use all of them. That's what I did. I used every single one of those things, and I use them every day. And it's not going to be fun. And it's crazy because a lot of the material in this exam, like I mentioned, is conceptually easy. From my experience, the Series 7 concepts were tougher, but the exam was at least a little more focused, making it a little bit easier, whereas the Series 65 is all over the place. You have economic concepts in one chapter, then you have laws and regs in another, then investment vehicles, ethics, then compliance, then blah, blah, blah. And it's like, they're all over the place, so it's very hard to stay focused. And while the material is, I think, easier, the test I found to be significantly harder. So you have to know this textbook and the material in and out. And all of the materials that I provided you are the best preps for doing that. I can't stress this enough. I really can't. This video is going long, but if I could do another hour of me just reiterating, read the textbook, I would. Essentially, that's it. read the damn textbook. That's what it really comes down to. But that's been it, guys. This is just an all-around look at the Series 65. I'm sure if you're anything like me, you had to take this for work, or you have to take this for yourself, or whatever. It doesn't matter. The reason doesn't matter. You have to take this exam one way or the other. And I get there's a lot of added stress that comes with that when you're potentially you could have your job on the line or things like that. I understand that. We've all been there. It's not fun. And unfortunately, it's something that you have to power through. But once you get past it and you're on the other side, it is one of the best and most rewarding feelings ever because you deserved it. That's what you got for all the hard work you put in, and you should go celebrate. But with that all out of the way, best of luck to you test takers. If you have any questions, I'm going to be lingering in the comments, and I plan on making more content about the Series 65, NASA's exams, FINRA's exams, and other financial concepts and things like that. So look out for that material. But by all means, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to help, and I will be talking to you down there. So with all that out of the way, thank you again so much for watching this video, and until the next one, I'll talk to you later. Peace out.